You ready? Okay. All right, so the title of this lecture is Critical Condo or Critical Theory. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the history of debate, because it's very important to understanding the way debate has evolved as an activity and the theory or the norms that we use to define the limits of said debate. Does anybody know what debate was in like the 50s and 60s? Anybody can imagine
White.
that? What? White? Yeah, of course, it was white, but what else?
I think it was like people reading off of like note cards and stuff.
Yep. But what was one really huge difference between debate now and debate back then?
There was like maybe disadvantages. Like they really just defended the status quo.
Yes. There was no counterplans or no critiques. It was the affirmative versus the status quo. Another thing that was important to understand about debate is that there was no affirmative and negative side. There was side 1 and side 2. Because the reason why is because both teams could defend essentially the affirmative in that debate. They could defend a change in the status quo. They could both be aft. Has anybody heard of plan debates? Anybody know what plan debates are? You're shaking your head. Yes. What?
It's literally just like a debate between two different like competing. Well, they don't have to be competing.
Exactly. They don't have to be competing.
Yeah.
It's essentially where two affirmatives run a topical affirmative, and then the debate is not whether or not the aft is a bad idea, but the quality of the internal links that both afts advance. And back in the 50s, this style of debate was very popular because, like, you didn't have counterplans. If you wanted to defend an action against the status quo, especially if the resolution was one that seemed to bias itself towards action over inaction, the way in which the second team kind of balanced that out was through running their own version of an aft plan and then having a debate about which aft was better. When do you think it was when they okay, and back then, the way in which they arbitrated debates wasn't by flowing. You know, you ever heard of the concept of the drop? What does it mean to drop an argument in a debate round?
Not explicitly answer it.
And what does that mean for the judge when someone drops an argument?
Agrees.
For the purpose, the phrase is, for the purpose of deliberation, it is considered true. So no matter what you say, it could be the most absurd claim in the world, like, I don't know, just some absurd, totally falsifiable claim.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't matter. What'd you say?
I was just doing an absurd thing.
Yeah, like my team won the kickball game. Exactly. An absurd, totally, patently false claim. It doesn't matter if you didn't respond to it. For the purpose of deliberation in that debate round, it is considered true. Before, during this old, which let's say classic debate, with side 1 and side 2, the drop was not the arbitrative paradigm in which they decided debates. Essentially, judges compared people's arguments they made with the truth of a status quo. Because back then, they believed that there was such a thing as an objective reality, and the judge's job was to essentially compare the arguments that one team made with what was true. What happened in the 60s? In this country, or in particular? What happened in the 60s, in particular in academia? What was popular in the 60s? Come on, critical people, you should know this.
High philosophy, high theory.
Yes, you had a situation where people were starting to question meta-narratives and assume truths about the world and reality. So do you think it would then be fair for a judge to then use their own interpretation of said objective reality to arbitrate a winner and a loser in a debate? No. So debate went through a crisis in which it had to create some type of new objective standard in which to arbitrate debate so that it would be fair for both teams. The thing that everyone in the debate community kind of agreed upon was this concept of dropping arguments being true, because it severed the judge's arbitrative decision-making process from the external reality that they were using to judge arguments, because they believed that they could hermetically steal off debates and evaluate them purely on the merits of what debaters were saying and how they responded to things. So the drop is actually not a thing that has always existed in debate. And and for me, when I first heard this, I thought that was wild. I was just like, how could you, like, there are so many conventions, so many things, strategic things we do in debates to force concessions because of that agreed upon metric for deciding debates, that it permeates almost everything that we do. It's hard to even conceptualize giving a speech without having that be the standard for how the judge is going to decide the debate. Because out of all the things you can argue with a judge, you know, they might be able to come up with a justification for how they interpreted an argument a particular way, or resolved a particular conflict in a type of way. But when a judge drops an argument and they don't respond to it, that's when you see like people post around it. That's when you see like debaters arguing with judges and being like, because that's controversial. Like if an argument is not responded to, it's pretty much a universal truth in debate that it's true. What are some problems you might think that might exist with that? You think that that's the way debate should be? You think that this debate is supposed to be about producing truth, or is it supposed to be about competition? What do you think?
It seems more fair than the thing you described before.
Sure, it's definitely more fair, but fair for what? What's the purpose of that fairness? Is that fairness supposed to produce just a game that we can all play fairly? Or is it supposed to produce education and truth about the world and the way we navigate it? Like, shouldn't debate give you more than just playing chess would? Like, I would like to think debate is more important than just a chess game. That it's more valuable to students than playing a game of strategy. Because then why do debate? Why don't we all just sit at home, play chess on computers, boom, portable skills solved, right? So debate. So do you agree with me? Do you think debate should be about more than just being a game?
Yeah.
Right. So if debate is more than just a game, and it should be about truth, then what types of techniques and ways of debating produce the best balance between the game, the competitive aspect of debate, and finding truth? Yes.
Probably theories that check back on like things that like exclusively try to like force concessions.
That's part of it. We're not quite there yet.
Right.
We're not quite there yet. We got to talk about one more thing before we move to theory, because modern theory, so the title of this lecture is supposed to be critical conditionality. Now, originally, what were the first conditional positions? Counterplans. Why? Why do you think it was in debate that someone stood up and thought it was okay to run multiple contradictory advocacies?
The school was probably like really fucked at the time and hard to defend.
That's a justification for a counterplan.
Oh.
That's not justification for a bunch of counterplans.
To test the affirmative. Like
Test what about the affirmative?
Like why that specific policy is a good idea and why other ones are not as good.
What about the affirmative is the counterplan actually testing? Think about it.
Effectiveness.
I mean, they solve things, right? Like,
what part of the counter? Because a lot of good counterplans will try to solve the internal links to the AF, so it's not about the advantages. What is the counterplan testing? What part of the AF? It's part of the shits. It's one of the stock issues.
Solvency.
Parts.
Or actually, ships. I'm sorry, not shits. Ships.
Ships.
Yeah. Ships. Or even, yeah.
It's the heart.
Internal.
The plan text. Has anybody ever heard the phrase plan-focused debate?
Yep.
That is the modern paradigm of traditional policy debate, is plan-focused debate. The whole point of contesting the affirmative is to contest the plan text. Counterplans were a way of focusing on the small procedural ticks and nuances of the way plan texts were written. Originally, picks were, you wrote your plan text inefficiently. You added this extra plank onto plan action. We can solve all of the affirmative without this, so we do all of your AF minus this one thing. Counterplans, in general, the whole concept of being counter to the affirmative is the counter to the affirmative plan. So in that sense, the whole paradigm of advocacy on the negative and testing the affirmative is filtered through plan-focused debate. Because think about it this way. because this might be a little hard to understand, but with traditional debate, permutations are about the plan text. They're about seeing if you can reconcile these two functional actions together. The whole concept of competitiveness that we understand in debate is attached to the focus on plans. Why do you think it's important that advocacies are competitive? Well, what does it mean for an advocacy to be competitive in a debate?
Not plan plus.
Okay, what does that mean? Not plan plus, you just define something as a negative.
Oh.
That could be a lot of different things.
Just like to be mutually exclusive with whatever the app proposes.
Right. To be mutually exclusive, but why does that matter? Who cares?
Because if you read a plan, and somebody's like, counterplan, do the app, then that's not really a debate.
It disproves the desirability of the app, or the possibility.
Do you really think that that's true? Do you really think that they would just go up there and defend, like they would just read the whole app? They would just be like, your exact same 1AC.
Well,
And they'd be like, we should win. How does that even make sense?
Well, it would like justify them reading like some like tiny little add-on that has like some minute internal link that solves like some really tiny thing, but since it's like 1% better than the app, I mean technically you have to go negative, which is pretty shitty, I think.
Yeah. What if the comparison between the two apps wasn't about the quantity of their impacts, but the quality of their internal links? Would it really be advantageous to read like these little squirrely add-ons that are ill-explained? Would that benefit you in that situation?
That's all we know.
No, it wouldn't. The function of that would justify that whole death scenario of, oh my God, they could just run some plan plus counterplan and we wouldn't have any way to defend against it. I'm like, that only makes sense. That argument only makes sense when you think that it's the plan text is the only thing that matters. The focus of the debate should be the plan text, the function of the app, not the quality of the way you articulate the internal links. Because even if we run the same exact affirmative, the way we will articulate those internal links and try to persuade a judge will be different. There will be some type of clash in those debates. Now, I'm a little controversial here because a lot of people think that plan debates are bad. But I think that modern day, has anybody heard the concept of you should vote on comparative methodologies in K debates, like in performance debates? Not competing methodologies, comparative methodologies. Well, that's an argument that a lot of people run on the college circuit, which is that it should be about a comparison, because a lot of times performative methodologies, there's no reason why you can't combine a lot of them. The permutation debates become really irrelevant, really absurd. Because if debate is about the performance, by the very nature, by you choosing to perform in a particular manner for 8 minutes that is different than the other person for 8 minutes, gives you a stable site of contestation in which you can compare the quality of the two performances. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. And in a lot of instances, they're not. And then you'll see in these debates where one team will stand up and read their performance app. How many people run their performance app as an argument on the negative? Really? Never? Yeah? Yeah. So when you stand up and read your performance app on the negative, that's essentially plan debate for that type of debate. So this new debate that people engage in isn't really new. It's actually really old. It's actually a throwback to classic 50s style Team 1 versus Team 2 debate. This goes to 12:30, right?
Yeah.
I always wish I had more time. Because it's like I'm trying to cut stuff out of my head because this is a lot of stuff I have going on. I haven't even gotten to conditionality. But you need to understand this backdrop. Because conditionality is an outgrowth of plan-focused debate. The reason that justifies us running multiple contradictory, squirrely, underdeveloped positions as fast as we can is because the plan text is the only thing that matters. And it doesn't matter how well we articulate the internal links. Because if you concede one of my 5 conditional counterplans, aha! You lose, because it's true, no matter what. So, I think debate, in my opinion, made a shift in the 60s and 70s to absolutely prioritize the game aspect of debate through plan-focused debate, which then justifies conditionality. Because if it's all about producing the best policy option, then why not run multiple contradictory ways of testing that particular phrase in the 1AC? What is the problem with that? What are some problems with like traditional conditionality in light of some of those things? Because we said this earlier. What would debate be if it was just a game? Yeah.
One problem is like people could make like 1,000 really absurd claims, and if you drop one of them, they could just say it's true, and that's not like a good model of debate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exclusive to people who are slower either because of, for example, disabilities, or just because like they can't do speaking drills before they
Exclusionary, definitely is. It's definitely a form of like privilege for people to compete at that level when it's just that focus. What does it do for performance debaters?
It's also exclusive for them if they can't, like, again.
What typically is a portion of performance? What is a key characteristic of good performances?
Are you talking about like the form and style?
This is more, the form it's connected to the form and the content. What must a good performance usually be?
I would say it's almost more emotional than technical.
What does it mean for...
Understandable.
What is that? No, it's closer to that. What does it mean for it to be emotional?
It's like really engaging with the politics of the body.
Exactly, it's embodied. Good performances are usually embodied. They're an expression of who you are and where you're from. Is who you are conditional? Can you just, like, not be brown, wake up one day and not be brown, be like, oh, Condo, color of my skin is Condo. I'm white now. Let's test this out. See how this works. Go into situations and act if I'm white. See what happens. Probably pretty dangerous, actually.
Yeah.
Especially dealing with people like the police. Probably wouldn't want to do that. So conditionality in general assumes a disconnected, distant, objective observer, this view from nowhere, that is completely stripped of embodiment. And as you all know, as K-debaters, that is a huge site of offense for the way that you criticize the other team. Is through their lack of attachment to the arguments that they run. Conditionality, as a function of plan-focused debate, supports a very specific subject location. People that have the privilege of shifting in and out of particular stances and modes of being in moments of articulation, of performance. That is completely ignorant and actually establishes techniques to not talk about the ways in which you're scripted in debate rounds. Because conditionality ignores all that stuff. Anybody ever read any George Yancey?
Yeah.
Come on, K people. Gotta be reading more George Yancey. Everyone heard the view from nowhere argument that George Yancey makes? Very good argument to make against conditionality. So usually when I'm debating conditionality, that is the argument I will read. I will couple that with a lot of the analysis that talks about why plan-focused debate and that our style, because a lot of the times judges will be like, well then what's the alternative? What do we do? They could run the plan plus counterplan. That's because everyone is trapped in this paradigm of plan-focused debate. I bet you a lot of you didn't even consider what plan-focused debate was and how it is connected to things like the drop and things like competition and things like permutations, which is like the whole of the techne of debate. Like all of those things are determined by that and all filter down to affirming a very specific subject position that is a reason why debate was mostly white. That is a reason why debate is mostly filled with privileged individuals. That is a reason why those individuals can relate to the type of scholarship and the types of games that are played in debate rounds, and the students who don't. Because why is embodiment important when you're not in a debate round? What are you doing when you're in a town hall? or you're talking to a principal fighting for concessions for a student organization or a group. Do you have the privilege of being conditional in those situations? Making contradictory arguments, testing it from multiple sides? You think that principal or that school board member is going to take you seriously if you perform like that? You tell me. What do you think? Do you think that's an effective strategy, that if you had to go talk to your school board, they were trying to cut your debate program, and you had to make an argument as to why they should keep debate, and you made contradictory arguments, and you were just like, oh, that's conditional? And after they tear one of them down, you think you have any credibility? No. You won't. These types of strategies only work in the context of, like, if you're a part of like a think tank in Washington, D.C. If you're like a policymaker in Capitol Hill and you're not on Congress's floor. When you're in the back room of Congress, yeah, some of these conditional strategies where, you're just an argumentative sociopath, that might work. It might work for you. But let's be honest here. Those types of jobs are probably one of the most, they're the elite of the elite. They're the privileged of the privileged. Get access to those types of positions or in those types of situations. What about the rest of us? What about the rest of us that are not going to be like congressional aides and research assistants at think tanks, and we just want to fight for things for our own communities? How do these types of practices equip us with the skills and knowledge necessary to effectuate change? Because what is advocacy? What is advocacy? What does it mean to advocate for something?
To say that you want something. What do you say, advocacy?
To say if you're an advocate for anti-racism or for animal rights. What does that mean? What am I saying when you're saying you're an advocate for those things? Or you're a tobacco lobbyist and you're advocating for, cigarette companies.
You're arguing for that, or like why you want the sort of ideas to be like represented.
Hold on, back there. What were you going to say? I thought you were about to say something. No. Yes.
That you think it's like important and other people should also think it's important?
Yeah. It's something that you're speaking on behalf of, advancing, and making an argument. Now, is conditionality, when the negative comes up there and runs conditional strategies, are they really advocating anything? Like, what are they advocating? I run my biopower K, my state's counterplan, my federalism disad, and like a word pick, and a bunch of case arguments. What's my advocacy in that 1 and C? I don't know. Look what I just ran. I don't know. I don't even know. How are you supposed to know? So, debate should be about advocacy skills. And the only thing you need to do as the other team is, a lot of judges are hesitant to vote on these types of concepts. One, because they have an investment in the game aspect of debate, because they were taught that way, their coaches were taught that way, and they teach their students that way. That means the debate has to be that way. When in reality, debate isn't about the judge. It's not about your coaches. It's about all of y'all. Because my career is over. I'm not debating anymore. Nope, never. Done. Gonna be 30 this year. Definitely done doing debate. Too old for that. So it's not going to be my responsibility to have these types of discussions, to determine these things for debate. It's going to be y'all's burden to do that. So part of what you have to do in these situations when you're making critical theory arguments is you have to teach your judge a new way of looking at debate. You can't just debate it like any other theory argument. It's the same thing when you're trying to run some theory K. High theory, or even like performance theory or race theory or whatever. At the end of the day, you're probably the biggest expert on those types of issues, especially if your judge is just some straight white guy in the back of the room. Like, even if they've read Wilderson and they've read all these authors, they don't know. I don't know. So it's your job as a student to essentially educate them in order for them to understand, or make arguments as to why you shouldn't and just win on something else, which we do sometimes. But the bottom line is you still need to present the judge with an intelligent vision of what debate should look like under your model of debate. And one of the easiest ways that I always do that is I talk about old-style debate. There are lots of articles out there, and there's no way I can go through all of them in the short amount of time to like explain to you, but there are tons of articles that talk about the history of debate, plan-focused debate, the drop as an arbitrative concept in debate. All of those things are important. Because talked about biopower because I think this is the way because this is the way I wrote this when I wrote this article. Y'all talked about biopower. Why is biopower bad? Why is that bad?
Controlling people's decisions and if they live or die is unethical.
That's part of it. But what is so insidious about biopower? What is the insidious aspect of that? Because if that were true, that's kind of obvious. You know, you shouldn't control people. Probably shouldn't kill people who deserve it. Who don't deserve it.
Choice.
Huh?
The illusion of choice.
Is part of it is the illusion of choice. But it's not so much the illusion of choice, but it's the illusion of necessity. Because biopower doesn't produce exclusion. It doesn't cause exclusion. It makes exclusion seem like a necessary political good. See, the Foucault and 78 impact says genocide is the dream of modern powers. Not that they actually commit it. Well, they are. The argument is that genocide is unfolding every day. But because it is a trap in the discourse or rhetoric of political goods or necessities, that anything is justifiable, including launching the bomb and exterminating an entire group of people off the face of the planet. Because if we shot nuclear weapons at Russia because we felt threatened, it wouldn't be because, oh, we're just going to commit genocide against the Ruskies and just articulate it like that. No, it would be like, we need to uphold America. The communists are out to get us, and we must kill them or else they're going to kill us. So our response, which is actually a genocidal intention and motivation, is now described and interpreted as a necessary good. Debate functions the same way. Debate turns all of these things, exclusion, violence, as necessary goods, as trapped in the rhetoric and discourse of being something we should strive for. So it's not like big D debate and the judges in the back of the room that are committing exclusion and genocide. It's debaters who make these arguments uncritically, unquestionably, and assume that this is the only way that the debate can happen. So in a lot of senses, that is biopolitical violence functioning in the confounds of debate. The whole concept of naturalizing exclusion, naturalizing violence towards embodied performances. That's how they can stand up and be like, framework, we're not trying to say you shouldn't be here, we're just trying to get education, we're just trying to get fairness, we're trying to get portable skills. Necessary political goods. Sacrificing you is necessary for the political whole, the we of the population that must be defended against the aberrant you. That's the way you couch theory arguments that people make against you, particularly when they make conditional performances. Because they are trying to naturalize and describe as good those types of exclusions. Which is why a lot of framework teams walk around and they don't understand. They're completely, and I totally believe that they are just unaware. They just haven't processed the implications or what they're really doing in those instances. Because I ran framework, I did all that stuff too. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was just trying to preserve portable skills, Judge. I thought I was trying to preserve education for everybody. In reality, I was doing violence and doing horrible things to my friends, who I really should have been standing in solidarity with and not telling them they shouldn't be here. So conditional performances, and that's another thing. If your arguments are conditional, our performance is conditional. Are good performances. Can a good performance be conditional? Yes or no? No. So their performance of conditionality in the 1 and C, even if the arguments are conditional, that 1 and C performance is certainly not. That's a common response that people make to this type of argument. Is like, oh, it's conditional. We just kick out all these arguments and just go for one. I'm like, that's okay. I'm like, no. The argument is not about because a lot of conditionality arguments, what are they about? Where do they focus the abusive arguments in? When they talk about why conditionality is bad, what speeches are they talking about? Is bad for what?
2AC.
It's bad for 2AC, right? Basically, they're talking about speeches other than the 1 and C. They're talking about speeches that happen later in the debate. They're saying that If you run conditional positions, you can skew us in the block. You can choose mutually exclusive 2 ARs. And my 1 AR can't answer it, and it provides for bad debates down the line. In reality, it should be about not what happens later in the debate. It should be about what happened in the beginning of the debate. You should be held accountable for the performance that you made in the 1NC. You deliberately came into this debate round and articulated a performance of conditionality in the 1NC. That is not something you can sever out of, because this argument is against something you had done, not something that you could do later in the debate. This isn't an argument about abuse. This is a critique of the way you have performed in this debate and the way that it establishes and reinforces violent debate norms and practices. Any questions about that? Because this is a lot of stuff, and I feel like I might be losing some of you all. But okay. What are some other things about conditionality? How many people here run conditional arguments, and then somebody asks them, say, "Oh, it's Condo." Sure. Sure. Why is conditionality good? Why are some reasons why conditionality is good? And I talked about a lot why it might be bad, especially for embodied performances. But why is it good?
Well, personally, since a lot of times my strategy is like one-off and then like heavy case debate, like a lot of my case arguments aren't necessarily just like defensive, but like since I have a lot of offense on case, sometimes I win a lot of debates. I'm just voting negative on presumption or like case terms, and I don't even have to go for the critique.
I'm really glad you brought up presumption, because that's where I was going with this. What is presumption?
The idea that the status quo is safer than any risk of an affirmative. Like, if all things are equal at the end of the debate, you should vote neg, because the risk of something new is too much.
Okay, that's part of presumption. What else happens with presumption? What else about presumption? Does presumption always work that way?
No, sometimes people make like AF on presumption arguments.
What does it mean to vote AF on presumption? Why is that the case? What does that mean?
If a method is introduced by the negative, and that method is proven to be worse than the status quo, or has the risk of being worse than the status quo, or has the risk of doing nothing at all, an introduction of change.
That's part of it, but like, why is it that when they say presumption flips? Something more basic. Why does presumption flip when the negative makes an advocacy, a counter plan?
Because the app is closer to the status quo.
I've actually always believed that. I have no clue.
Ha, I'm glad. This is something that's important we should talk about. Okay. So think of it like in a court of law. The state is the affirmative. They have the burden of proof. They have to prove somebody beyond a reasonable doubt that they are guilty. Right? That's what the affirmative is doing. The affirmative is putting the status quo on trial. And they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the status quo is bad. And the way that they do that is by satisfying the burdens that every affirmative must satisfy. Because that is the standard of quote-unquote reasonable doubt for a debate round. Yeah. In a court of law, does presumption shift ever? You ever know? That's false. Sorry, y'all. Presumption definitely flips in courts of law. What happens when you make what is called an affirmative defense? And you say like, oh, yeah, I killed that person, but it was self-defense. Or, yup, I jaywalked or had to do something else because I had to save the life of somebody else. I had to commit some crime in order to save the life of others. Or I was mentally ill. Like, yes, I did that, but I was insane at the time, so I'm not guilty. The burden shifts. The burden is no longer on the state. The burden is on the defendant to prove that they were insane at the time or that they acted in self-defense and so on and so forth. That's because the facts of the case are agreed to. There's no doubt that this crime was committed, that this set of actions happened. Same thing for the negative. The reason why burden flips to the affirmative when the negative presents something like a counterplan is because the affirmative, they're conceding the affirmative has met its burden to prove the status quo insufficient. Both sides are agreeing that some change must occur. So that's why do you think it is that if a counterplan solves exactly the same as the affirmative, like it's like the same, like it's a tie essentially between the counterplan and the plan, that the tie goes to the aff? Is because at least the aff has done the thing that it was supposed to do, which is meet its burden to prove the status quo insufficient. So they get essentially the credit for that tiebreaker.
Well,
what was your question?
I'm not sure. Well, how come you usually hear about affirm presumption in the context of K debates, and people aren't generally reading counterpoints in those?
Good question. The reason why is because the negative critique, much like a counterplan, prescribes an action to resolve something about the status quo. Very rarely is the critique alternative like the status quo, because that is non-unique. Because remember, as from our lecture the other day, all critiques are non-unique without a reason why the alternative resolves that. Because they're just like capitalism, for example. Just a review from the other day. Capitalism exists now. People are dying from cap. The aff does something that's capitalist. Why is then the aff now a bad idea if everything that is done in the world is capitalist? Why does that mean we reject the aff? Doesn't. So that's why the negative has to prescribe some type of alternative, either revolution, communism, metaphorical condensation, something, in order to try to resolve some of those links, or at least like make progress on them, so that it can justify rejecting the affirmative. In the same way, you need, in order to convict somebody of murder, you need to prove that there was an alternative to acting in self-defense. Like the way you hold someone culpable for things that they do, because if they do things out of necessity, they're not responsible. And that goes back to my original argument about necessity in debate. I'm not responsible for the exclusion I produced, Judge, because there wasn't any other thing I could have done. There wasn't any other way we could have debated. Which is why when you're making critical theory arguments, it's also important to debate it kind of like a K, where there needs to be some type of alternative in order to resolve some of the things that they talk about that are important to debate. So that's why presumption shifts. But presumption is a function of plan-focused debate as well. Like our common understanding of where we presume aff and negative is in order to establish clash between the affirmative and the negative, to incentivize both teams to debate in certain ways. Do you think you need presumption in a world where we have like comparative methodologies? We compare the quality of two internal links. Why would you make a presumption claim in that instance? You wouldn't. Debate might be a little bit more subjective because the question of whether or not the quality of internal links is produced is kind of dependent on the judge. But isn't that life? Doesn't who you are and what you've experienced and the subject location you occupy, doesn't that matter when you're talking about arguments, particularly performance arguments? Isn't that something that is drawn into question? So is it really subjective in the sense like it's disconnected from the debate? Or is it now part of the debate? Is it now part of the site of contestation that debaters can debate about? You as a white judge should act X. You have heard those arguments in debates all the time as a judge who's white. Like, you as a white judge need to act in accordance ways because of so-and-so and so and such. So is it really that big of a deal that those types of things occur? If that's already part of the debate? Like, isn't your desire to say that these debates are subjective and we should evaluate things on the drop just a desire to ignore people's subject location, people's embodiment in debate rounds? All of these are all strategies of privilege. They're all ways of, oh, I had no other choice, Judge. Had to act like violent. Had to exclude this person from the debate. Can't talk about this stuff. And let's talk a little bit about competition for a moment. What is one of the problems that people always present in comparative methodologies? Why would that be a bad form of debate?
Because there's no way to sort of like, if like two people read like personal narratives, then there's no, you have to be forced to make like a decision between who has worse violence done upon to them.
Thinking like it leads to like an oppression Olympics?
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly what I think. Yeah. I use that in a lot of my speeches actually.
Yeah. That's a good one. Oppression Olympics. What else? It's more like theoretical reason. Yeah, that's a hard debate to decide, but I think that my argument about subject location kind of answers that.
Yeah.
Also, the oppression Olympics thing is a really, you scripted a very stereotypical negative stereotype about performance debate, and that's probably racist. That you think that the way that black debaters engage in debates is just oppression Olympics, because their methodologies are way more nuanced than that, and they very rarely devolve down to, I'm more oppressed than you, so I should win. So you should lose for making that characterization. Not really. You know what I'm saying. That's the answer. Yeah, that's the answer that I would make to that.
Yeah, most people don't know how to answer it. I think it's strategic, but like.
No, I'm sure it works in debates. I'm just saying is I don't think that's a good argument.
Fair enough.
But there's something else I'm looking for. What is a theoretical reason as to why comparative methodologies might be bad? Because it's of something we do in debate all the time when negative runs. What is when a negative runs an advocacy, what is always an affirmative argument usually to that advocacy? Permutations. Exactly. One of the most common arguments people make is like, oh, we could always just permute and then we wouldn't be able to have any debates because the perm would always solve and the aff would always win. But why are permutations? Do you think permutations produce the best types of debate?
Sometimes they get really good because the negative has to really hammer down on why it's mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives it a bit more clout.
Why wouldn't that also exist in a world where there are comparative methodologies and I had to make link turn arguments? I think in a lot of instances that you're describing, that's no different. That's not a permutation. That's a link turn. My internal links solve your internal links. Comparing the internal links between one performance and another. The benefits of the type of debate that he's just described can occur in a round where the whole point is to compare the quality of the internal links. If anything, those debates are a lot better. Because what happens with most permutations that affirmatives make? Are they usually we do all the aff and most of the most of the negative? What usually are they?
Like what's the text of the perm?
Yeah, they make
do each like ours first, then do it.
Yeah, they had all these other things that is neither the aff and neither the negative to talk about. Let's do the neg first and then the aff first. Let's do this part or that part. I'm like, no. None of those debates are realistic. Think of it this way. On the authority topic back in high school, like years ago, I was like a first year out. I was my first year of college. It was like 2006, I think was the year. And it was a surveillance topic, I think it was. It was either a surveillance topic or it was the authority topic. I don't know. Either way. So, the affirmative is food stamps. The United States federal government should provide food stamps to people. Or it's poverty. I'm sorry, the poverty topic. The United States federal government should provide funding for food stamps for people. Negative stands up and runs the anarchy counterplan. We should get rid of the state. The affirmative stands up and says, perm. We should give food stamps and create anarchy at the same time.
What?
That's it.
But then the debate could be about do food stamps first, then do the aff, then do the neg. And then the whole debate becomes about this irrelevant, absurd, hypothetical combination of two things that that discussion is not useful to the debate about the merits of how we should. Yeah.
Don't you agree that I think in those kind of debates, permutations have competitive debates where things are definitely competing permutations. Well, I think perm should still be allowed to punish people who do shitty things or things that are barely different than the affirmative.
Why would that be any different than a link turn debate?
It's probably not, but yeah.
Why do we need to have this hypothetical technique of permutation to an apparatus of competitiveness that enforces a very privileged model of debate? Because we already talked about the way that competitiveness is produced is through plan-focused debate, and permutations are a search to try to establish competitiveness. Because they believe that comparing different methodologies isn't real debate. Because that's the subtext to what they're saying. Is that this type of debate is just oppression Olympics. It's just some black stuff. Who cares? Just everything's the same. And it's all bad. So we need to do this hypothetical combinations and stuff and have these conversations that aren't productive. Whereas in link turns or comparative methods debates, the way in which you compare and contrast internal links, in a lot of ways, mirrors what goes on in the real world. Because in a lot of times when I'm at a town council, if I'm at a city council, we're in agreement more than we're farther apart. There is more commonality between our two positions than where we differ. Very rarely in life will you have these neat separations between you and the person you're talking to. There is never usually an AF and a negative. In democracy, and this is, I know for K people it's a little problematic, but for traditional democratic values, we're all on the same team. There is no AF and neg. We don't win or lose. It's not like you win, I lose. We either all win together, we all lose. We're in this together. So it should be about, you should be taught methods of making compromises, recognizing similarities, and being able to focus on differences that produce discussions that make all of our arguments better. So when you have like these performance v. performance debates, the types of debates that unfold are highly productive for the students that are in those debates. And essentially what that is the AF, which is unconditional, and it's not in the AF, but the affirmative advocacy, which is unconditional, and the negative advocacy, which is unconditional. And then the debate becomes be about that. There is no permutations, which means that there is always essential competition, which is at best just as artificial as plan-focused debate, because that's not real competition. That real competition is produced through irrelevant. Is that real clash? Is that the food stamps anarchy permutation debate? Is that really the type of clash that debate should be producing? No. Or would have been the better clash been to just have a discussion about the essential values of having state governance as opposed to not? And if the affirmative gets their advocacy of food stamps, and the negative gets their advocacy of anarchy, and there is nothing else to talk about in the debate, and it is just a discussion about which method produces the best good, or in this instance, what the quality of each of those internal links is, those types of discussions, one, produce clash, and two, produce highly educational debates for people that want to engage in real-world politics. And that's the way that you impact out these arguments in contrast of the other team. Because they're going to accuse you of everything under the sun because you're abandoning these traditional concepts of debate. One of the other things that is coupled with this that I should mention, because we're running out of time, is that usually the negative has a burden then, of course, of response in comparative method debates, which prevents the I just read your same exact performance, even though my argument would be like, if you stood up and read my same exact performance, they wouldn't be the same, because I would perform differently than you. My subject location would be different than yours. The way that we articulate and relate and embody those internal links would always essentially be different. That subject location and positioning and structural positioning in society kind of guarantees sites of contestation. In the same way antagonisms for people like Wilderson say that are essential. Between black versus white in society, there are antagonisms. Those antagonisms don't just disappear because you walk into a debate round. Social antagonism will always be a stable and predictable site of contestation and clash. Those things are not going away. They're not going to go away just because we imagine them not to be. We create theoretical devices to wall debate off from the real world, to hermetically seal it on a sheet of paper with arguments and arrows and circles and bubbles, which don't count for anything. That's irrelevant. Because out of all the things that I talk to about administrators and professors, because I've had to work very hard my whole life to establish the Rutgers program, and one of the hardest things to get real academics behind in terms of as an educational device is the concept of the drop. They follow me. Everything else, cost-benefit analysis, plan debate, topicality, critiques, even performance. They're like, sure, we get all that. That makes sense to us. But when I start talking about dropped arguments, they look at me like I have 20 heads. Look at me like I'm saying something crazy. Because they're just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that doesn't seem to cohere with the pedagogical practices and methods that they've been taught to effectuate change. It seems to be counterintuitive to a lot of those types of methods. So, okay, I've been talking a really long time, and we only have a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to kind of open it up for any questions or any other discussion points you may want to follow, because I threw a lot at you. Because there's a whole stuff about ethics and subjectivity that I didn't even get to. But yeah.
When reading Wilderson arguments, how do you feel about like answering the permutation with like sort of like the fluid whiteness argument?
Well, that's essentially what this argument is. The argument I'm making by conditionality is that all of these techniques are a way of maintaining the fluidity of privileged positions, being able to shift in and out of particular arguments and to conceal the political and intentional constructions of those positions. They're not natural. In the same way I was talking about biopower making unnatural political phenomena seem natural and essential, that's what they're doing. That's how biopower is violent. Biopower is violence because Foucault defines violence as when actions act upon another set of actions. When there isn't a moment of call and response, of disagreement. And when you could use discursive phrases and discursive positioning in ways that prevent us from resolving those differences through conversation, through taking disagreement with what I'm saying, that is violence. To deny the political nature of the way that some of these techniques have been established in debate, that is violence. That is discursive violence in the flesh. Come to life. And it's because we don't see it as such. We just see it as like, oh, that was just an inane, essential debate practice, whatever. That's violence. That transmutation of a political evil into a political good. That's what makes biopower so scary. Not the, oh man, you just got oppressed, or panopticon, or the camp. That's not scary. But what I've just described, imagine, I know I have seen problems in life where I walk around and everyone thinks that they're not real. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, and they make you feel freaking crazy because you feel like you're in a nightmare. Where like no one can, you just think you're crazy because the things you see and things you observe as problems, people just act like they're not real. That's terrifying. That's what biopower really is you, that person trapped in that nightmare of seeing all this gratuitous, awful things that occur in the world, and everyone just telling you that you're dreaming, you're hallucinating, or all that stuff is justified. That is terrifying. But yeah, any other questions? Well, I hope this was helpful for you all.
So it is 12:30.
I'm gonna make a phone call. I'm gonna shut this.